Hello there, sword friends. I am not Matthew Jensen, but for the purposes of this review, I don't need to be. Today, we are taking a look at the 65 manganese steel Iaito from Ryujin Katanas. Ryujin is a company that's kind of particularly well known for sort of releasing sort of these budget-friendly custom katanas through the Sword Bar Guide store. And this is no exception to that. In fact, this is their newest release, I believe. And I thought I'd give some initial first impressions of this product line since nobody else seems to have made one, and I was on the market for a new Iaito anyway, so might as well be the one to take the first bite. Let me start going from tip to butt, or I guess butt to tip. Anyway, let's start at the Kashira. Kashira is standard Ryujin's iron fittings. It's sort of made in this sort of pseudo Musashi pattern that Ryujin's pretty typical for knowing. As those of you who know from Matthew Jensen's own review, this is not actually covering over the wood. This is actually pegged into the Suka core. There's always debates on, how useful that is for the security of the kasha, as well as, what that's going to end up doing with sufficient practice if you whack it into enough things. But this thing isn't really meant for whacking into things. This is just mostly meant for practicing swinging. So I honestly don't see that to be that big of a problem. The Ito itself is actually pretty decently tight. It's very difficult for me to nudge. And what's interesting to note about this is that this sword doesn't have any Hishigami in it. At least I don't think it does. So there's nothing really holding this stability to this other than just friction. And, given that, this is actually pretty decently tight Ito. I'm actually mildly impressed with that. It's not bad at all. The Manuki are standard Kenmaki Ryu fittings. It's Ryujin. It's nothing particularly fancy. It's just sort of brass alloy fittings. Not particularly detailed. Not particularly fanciful. Beyond just it looks like fucking gold. Go figure. Kashira, the Fushi itself is again kind of so-so. There's a bit of a ledge here on both ends of the Tsuka that honestly aren't great, but they aren't large enough that it becomes distracting for usage. So I guess it kind of evens out there. The Makugi it's a double Makugi pinned katana as well, but I'll be honest, this is a kind of a yikes spot. And to be honest, this seems to be a common occurrence in most low-budget katanas, though that for some reason they can't seem to get the Samegawa to pop out pretty around the Makugi pin. But this seems to be the only side that you get that sort of ugly hole. All the other ones seem to be pretty decently well done, so I guess I can't complain too much. Speaking of things to compliment, though, the Samegawa is actually of surprisingly decent quality. I'm not sure if you can see it that well. Let me put on a light. So, that did not help it at all. But if you take a close look at it, the Samegawa is actually a pretty decent size. And in fact, if you take a close look at, I believe it's somewhere around here. Yeah, right there. You can actually see a emperor node. Emperor nodes are kind of cherished and sought after if you're in the market for katanas, because this is supposed to be the most prized part of the Samegawa. Now, usually whenever you put in that Samegawa, it's usually located somewhere around here, not up here. But hey, it's an emperor node. It's a fucking $189 katana with an emperor node. Where it's placed, honestly, the fact that you even have it already has raised the value of this katana probably by an extra $50. So good on you, Ryujin, for not skimping on quality. I just wish that you would properly place it. But those are things to improve for next time. And we've got the Suba. The Suba is is the Ryujin's Kaitatsu themed Tsuba. Now, you can buy this on other sword buyer guide swords, and in fact, this is one of the more common ones bought. But and you can find it also on Iron Tiger forged swords as well. But it's a reasonably it's honestly a rather pretty one. It's not a particularly detailed. It's cast fittings like the Fuchi, the Kashira, and the Minuki, but it looks nice. It genuinely does look nice. It's not the most detailed katana you'll ever see in terms of its Tsuba quality, but it's sufficient. Then you've got, standard brass habaki and seppa. Nothing to write home about. We can skip over that. So now we can start talking about the last bits, which is the saya. The saya is a fairly decent quality. You can notice that it's in this sort of burgundy color. And I kind of wanted it to have a different color palette. The Sageo came with, I assumed that it was going to come in this sort of midnight blue, but instead it came with this pseudo wine red. Honestly, it kind of clashes. I'm not a huge fan of that. If anything, I would have probably preferred a white Sageo, but honestly, the Sageo is cheap enough that, you could honestly go ahead and replace it probably somewhere down the line. And I probably will myself eventually, hopefully, if I'm not completely stupid. One interesting thing to note, rattle with this Iaito, honestly, it's not that bad. It rattles just a tiny bit, but it's not very perceivable. What's a much bigger problem is, that. The habaki does not grip into the kojiri that tightly. In fact, if I even put it on a slight incline, the sword is liable to just sort of fly out on its own. This is not how a katana is supposed to be. The habaki should be gripping at the koji. So that at the koiguchi, not the kojiri. Kojiri is at the back, koiguchi is at the front. Yeah, so the koiguchi does not grab the habaki very well, so that's kind of a negative. But quite frankly, this is a $189 sword, so it's difficult to bitch at. Things it doesn't do is bind. This sword doesn't bind when you draw it. It doesn't rattle when you shake it. It just gets it's just really loose. And honestly, how much of that is a negative to you, I guess is going to sort of depend on, how much you care about those things. Certainly for safety storage reasons, probably not the greatest, but I suppose as long as you're not trying to bend forward, it should be sufficiently tight enough. And if that's an issue, you can always just put your thumb over the Tsuba, and that should be sufficient to keep it in. Now we can finally get on to the blade, the pointy stabby part of it. And, I would say the pointy stabby part of it, but it's an Iaito, so this thing is about as dull as your second grade bully. But that said, it's got a good heft to it. You might notice that unlike a lot of Iaitos, this does not have a bohi. This was an intentional choice. Now, what the bohi is supposed to do is it's supposed to lighten the blade without compromising structural integrity. At least to the point that it, as long as you're swinging it in the correct direction. One of the side benefits of this is that it produces this characteristic whistle sound that you commonly see in Hollywood movies whenever a katana is swung. So this is actually useful for training because it sort of gives you an audio feedback about how good your technique is. If you're correctly aligning your edge with your cut, then it's going to produce the audio feedback of that characteristic whistle and go, this is where I need to start swinging it. This does not produce that. Or if it does, it's so minutely traceable, you probably would miss it. But if all you're looking to do is just practice swinging, it's how to manipulate that weight. It's pretty decent at that. It's certainly not as light and lively as a sword with the bohie, but if you're not needing a sword with the bohie, this is more than sufficient. You might also notice that the tip is blunted. This is actually a fairly unusual feature of the Iaito that Ryujin produces that I don't see a lot of other companies do. But I'm honestly kind of happy they do it here, because it means that if, for example, you wanted to use this for stage combat or kata practice, you could. Should you though? Probably not, unless you're already an advanced practitioner. But the fact that the option is even available to you is a pretty nifty feature. One other nifty feature of this blade, aside from being made from very popular spring steel, is the fact that it is carrying a Midori pattern hamon. Yes, this is a real hamon. This isn't fake. This is a differentially hardened spring steel. Now, differentially hardening a spring steel kind of defeats the whole point of having a spring steel, but it does produce this nice, beautiful hamon pattern. Bad side is, if you whack it in the wrong direction, this thing is going to get bent. Good thing is that this is a good simulant of what an actual katana will do when you strike an object, sans cutting. So it's a very good, so all in all, it's a good simulant. And you get a good feel for the weight, you get a good feel for the weight, you get a good feel for the authority of the cut, and you don't have to worry about cutting through yourself or through your ceiling, and then incurring the wrath of your landlord, which is something I was deeply concerned about, and probably the main reason why I didn't buy a live blade to begin with. Now, if I can just put this back in. There we go. So, final thoughts. Overall, this sword I'd say this is a worthwhile buy. Just on initial impressions. This could obviously change quite a bit in 3 months. And I said the similar things about my first Iaito, and I don't really have those opinions of it anymore. But so far, this seems to be a very well put together, very well thought out Iaito piece, and it comes with some features that honestly are rather surprising to encounter at a sword at this price. This is a $189 sword. So if you're looking for any Iaito that's fairly cheap, fairly well put together, and you don't mind dealing with a minor ledge on the Fuchi, or a kind of loose Habaki Koiguchi hold in the Saya, or potentially or a potential mismatch of Segale. I'd say this is a worthwhile pickup. So if you want to pick one up, you can. The Sword Buyer Guide is again selling this for $189. Who knows, maybe in a few years' time you may be finding these on the used market as well. But until that point, this has been my first impressions and thoughts on this sword, and I guess I will see you around some point, sometime in the future. Take care, everyone.